Some of the struggles shaping our time are not always easy to see. For generations, many men have been taught the same lessons: to be strong, to provide, and to keep their emotions beneath the surface. But what happens when those lessons are questioned? In recent years, more voices have begun examining the stories we inherit about masculinity, identity, and what it means to be a man in the modern world. Some call it deconstruction. Others call it unlearning. At its heart, it's a search for something more honest, emotional freedom, healthier relationships, and a new path forward for the next generation. Joining us today is Owen Squires, a social media creator whose work explores masculinity, emotional awareness, and the evolving role of men in today's world.
I woke up super fucking emotional this morning, and I wanted to say that going through this unlearning, deconstructing journey, trying to deconstruct prescribed patriarchal masculinity and internalized misogyny is fucking heavy. It's fucking heavy. And there are days where it is just so overwhelming, you know? I'm 41 now, and you look back on a lifetime. You just look back on a lifetime of like a society that has just fucking imprinted on you so intensely and so deeply. And I like growing up in an authoritarian patriarchal household with a father that was incapable of accountability and having nowhere to put your emotions, nowhere to put your feelings, constantly being wrong about everything, and just like, I don't know, man, fucking trying to fit into society as a guy, you know? You gotta be tough, you gotta be strong, you gotta like sports, you gotta work out, you gotta drink beer. And it's like, it's all fucking bullshit. It's all bullshit. I wake up every day with a back, like I have a high school football injury on my back that has ruined my fucking quality of life. I struggle to pick up my kids. I struggle to play with my kids. I've been to the chiropractor fucking 300 times. I've seen a back surgeon. Like, I'm in pain every day because of some sport I didn't want to fucking play in the first place, you know? And like, I became an alcoholic from all of the shit I went through in childhood. My nervous system was so fucking dysregulated by the time I was a young teenager, young adult, that when I had my first drink, it fucking changed my life. It changed my life, and I became a fucking alcoholic. I drank myself into the emergency room multiple times. Like, drinking has almost killed me multiple times. I was in rehab by the age of 25, and I've ruined every relationship I've ever been in. You know, I'm finally I've been with my wife 10 years now. Prior to that, I was incapable of being in a relationship. I didn't know it. I was never the problem. It was always someone else's fault. I was fucking undateable. And just like, when you start down this path and you're doing it honestly and you're doing it in an authentic way, it's gonna be fucking heavy. It's gonna be heavy and it's gonna hurt, and you're gonna question a lot of shit, you know? Deconstructing, unlearning, a lot about, I guess, maybe the way I was raised, societal standards for men, you know, patriarchal masculinity, toxic masculinity. Like, what is that? It's like this buzzword we hear, you know? And so I've continued to learn and grow and then share about my experience along the way. That's kind of me in a nutshell.
Can you talk about like the deconstruction journey that you're talking about? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, can you kind of describe that and what that means to you?
Yeah. So early on, I got married in 2017, and my first two kids were girls, my daughters, and the deconstruction happened very slowly at first. It wasn't even something I knew I was interested in, you know, being a stay-at-home dad, being married to a woman, having daughters. I started, I guess, to listen more, you know. My wife and I were doing a lot of arguing at the time. She was not happy with The level of support I was offering as a dad, honestly, I was terrible. I was a terrible father in the beginning. I just like I don't know what my expectations were, you know? I put a lot on her. I wanted to be out in the shop farting around with my woodworking and doing this and doing that. And why can't you handle both kids? You know, why is this and why is that? And I remember there was like this pivotal moment. I remember like it was yesterday. And my wife was working. She was trying to take care of both our young children while I was out in the shop working on this coffee table that I was building, you know, and she was also trying to cook dinner. She had our 6 month old like in the carrier on her chest with our little toddler following her around the kitchen while she's trying to make dinner. I'm out in the shop and she comes out into the shop. We had like this detached garage where I had all my woodworking stuff set up. And she came in there with the kids, with my plate of dinner, and I had this extension cord stretched across the aisleway that she didn't see. And she tripped over that with our little one on her chest and this plate of food. And the food went flying up in the air and she fell and, like, you know, held on to our baby. She didn't get hurt, thank God. But I was just like, oh my God. And I don't know. We had an argument after that. And I didn't know it at the time, but I look back on that as like that was sort of the epitome of my incompetence, you know, and my refusal to learn and change. And I became a stay-at-home dad shortly after that. You know, COVID hit and we took the kids out of daycare. I became a stay-at-home dad, and I was blown away by how challenging it was. My kids were my girls were 2 and 3 at that time, and I was just completely overwhelmed, right? And I know this is a long answer to your question, but I was completely overwhelmed, and I felt like there was there was this whole world of um, responsibility that we put onto mothers that that goes unacknowledged by most men, right? I remember before I had kids, I thought the stay-at-home role, like they had it easy, you know, they really had it easy. They were a bunch of freeloaders. Their husband was working while they stay home and take care of 2 kids and watch soap operas, you know, because that was kind of the narrative. That was the way most men saw it when we were growing up. And you know, if you made enough money to let your wife stay home, she had it made, you know. And then when I started doing it, I was like, it is nothing like that. It's nothing like that.
Hmm.
I am stressed out of my mind every day. You cannot clock out. There is no break mentally from the responsibility. There's always a mess to clean up. There's always somebody crying. There's always someone that needs you. Whenever they have a question, they come to you. And I just, it really changed my mind. It really changed my point of
Hmm.
view, you know, and I started talking about that on TikTok. That was kind
Yeah.
of where it started for me. And
Yeah.
I had a video that did really well, and I got a lot of followers really quickly. And I just continued to pursue that, you know, and it
Yeah.
has pushed me to continue to explore, deconstruct a lot of sort of what I was taught growing up, what society teaches men, what the expectations are for men. And so it went from, hey, women need more support to like, wow, maybe men need a lot more support too. You know, maybe
Yeah.
all these narratives that we've grown up with aren't maybe they're fabricated, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good pivot. I think we can kind of want to hit on that and talk about that with you because what your experience that you just described was that you had a moment that you realized, like, wait a minute, I'm not doing my part in it. But a lot of the things that you thought, your worldview of how things are supposed to be, obviously got ingrained in you from like a young age, or seeing how, you know, your parents' relationship was, or just how generationally in society, how these things kind of shaped us. And I think a lot of men especially have this view on like, oh, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to make the money, I come home, food's going to be made, kids are going to get taken care of, and then I get to do my thing, eat, take a shower, go to sleep, wake up, do it all over again. And I think a lot of that is being questioned now. A lot of people are, challenging that. Men are kind of opening up more. I think they're pushing against that like societal worldview. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit and how like, your upbringing probably may have affected the way you saw things in your relationship early on?
Yeah. Yes, of course. That's a good question. I think that my dad was also raised in a I mean, he was raised in a society and in a household where there was a lot of misogyny. There was a certain outlook toward women, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, on into the 90s when we were kids. And so a lot of that carried over into my upbringing. I have one sibling who's also a guy. We grew up as brothers, and my dad, I don't want to put my dad on blast. I still love my dad. I have a close relationship with him, but there was a lot, and there has been a lot that we have had to talk through in terms of my childhood, trying to open his eyes and get him to see like this was not okay and that was not okay. And this is not the way things should have been laid out for us and the example that we had. And there was a lot of like fighting, it felt a lot of times like my mom was sort of there to serve my dad. He never changed a diaper, he never helped with laundry, never helped with dishes. When he was off of work and he got home, it was his time to relax. And my mom waited on him hand and foot. And she worked full time. She worked 45 hours a week in a dental office. And that was the example my brother and I had. He moved out on us a couple of times. He was never satisfied. He always wanted more. And I grew up in a childhood where it was all about my dad's needs, all of his anxiety, all of his, you're not doing this right, you're not doing that right, get your room clean, go do this, go do that. Any decision I had on my life or a direction I wanted to go, he typically had something negative to say about it. And I say a lot of times it's not always like the hands-on physical kind of violence toward your kids, which there was, but a lot of it is like emotional scars, constantly having someone judging you, breathing down your neck, pouring all of their anxiety from life into you and your brother. And it really, really deeply impacted me.
Hmm.
By the time I was a teenager, early 20s, I feel like my nervous system was incredibly dysregulated.
Yeah.
I had a childhood that I had to survive. It wasn't this like warm, comfortable place where I could go to be safe and to be
Hmm.
authentic and be myself, and be creative.
Yeah.
It was like my brother and I were constantly on our toes, and we had to survive this life with my dad when he was younger.
Hmm.
And then I found alcohol, and it just like changed who I was instantly. The first
Yeah.
time I got drunk. That's a whole different subject. Um,
Yeah. I
but
mean,
I
you
but
can
I
get into
bet
it if you want to, but we don't have to. It's up to you.
yeah, I don't mind at all. So I think, to answer your question, a lot of this deconstruction journey is looking back on that and saying, what is it that I can learn to make things different for my daughters and for my son, who's
Hmm.
4 months old. And I think that there is sort of this narrative where boys don't have emotions. It's not socially or societally acceptable for young boys to have their emotions. Boys don't cry. Boys need to be strong, like softness equals weakness, which is bullshit.
Yeah.
Like softness does not equal weakness. It equals strength. Emotional intelligence equals strength. And um I think that, a lot of that is perpetuated onto us as kids because our own parents are hurt, and didn't have an example of how to be a strong leader, to be masculine but kind and
Yeah.
soft at the same time, and to foster those, especially when you're really little, when you're small, like your first 6, 7, 8 years, that's when you need a dad that is patient, and can set the tone and let you have your feelings, let you have your opinion, and say, hey, you can freak out, you can be upset about something, but daddy's got you.
Yeah.
Daddy's going to be calm. Daddy's going to be waiting for a hug, waiting for you with a hug when you're ready. And like, we still teach structure and discipline, and there are expectations, and you have to teach them how to survive in life, but you
Yeah.
can do it in a way that is supporting and loving and
Yeah.
kind, patient. And I don't do that all the time. I still have my moments. My kids would be like, "Yeah, daddy yells sometimes." Like
Yeah.
I'm not perfect. I'm still trying to get better at this, and I'm just sort of like sharing it with other people
Hmm.
as I go.
Yeah. So what you're talking about, basically, you were able to gain that self-awareness in your life. And yes, every day I think we stumble and we have moments, but I think just recognizing those moments and being like, okay, this is something I can work on. This is something I can improve on. So I think, you gained that and that's the most important thing. But something you hit on too is basically the generational trauma that we kind of grow up into, and it kind of gets forced onto us because it got forced onto our parents. And just as much as we receive that, and we receive the pressures from like, oh, suck it up, don't cry, be tough. Women get the other side of that too. They get they get the Barbie dolls. Take care of your man. They get other narratives that they grow up with. Society has put on them as well. So men have a certain set of standards that we're supposed to abide by. Women have a certain set of standards that they're supposed to abide by, and it just doesn't mesh a lot of the times. And that's why there's a lot of unhappy homes. You have a lot of expectations on both sides that they look at. Women look at men as like, oh, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and then we look at women like, oh, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and that's what creates a lot of disconnect within relationships. And
Yeah.
it takes at least one person to wake up from that. And I had a conversation with my hypnotherapist that I had a podcast with, and you know she just we talked about like when one person wakes up and finally starts growing, it's the other person has to do the same thing, else the relationship's not going to work. So I would imagine that like when you started on this journey, you changed and you made, it probably surprised your wife in a lot of ways. And it probably, you guys probably, she had to probably change to some degree too, because she had to get used to what you're going through and how you were shifting in your life as well. And, so I'd imagine that was the case in your household.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, very much so. She's on her own journey, and um, I feel like I had a lot more room for change, needing to change.
Hmm.
If one of us in the relationship was toxic, it was me.
Yeah.
I admit that wholeheartedly,
Yeah.
and I needed growth a lot more than she did. But
Yeah.
she's still learning and reading and growing, and I bounce things off of her all the time.
Yeah.
Like learning to listen to women was a skill I had to develop. That's hard to admit. And it's
Yeah.
not like I didn't listen to women, but to truly listen, like ask follow-up questions. What is your opinion on this? Like, how do you see it from a woman's perspective?
Hmm.
And then like just shut my mouth and listen,
Hmm.
you know? And that's been a game changer for me. My
Yeah.
wife is very intelligent, and she has some really good points of view on a lot of different things that I'm trying to deconstruct. And I think that going back to what we were saying earlier, patriarchy, patriarchal masculinity, it's kind of this buzzword that people say, patriarchy. Oh, what's that about? The last 5, 6, 7 years, people have been talking more about it. And I think for a lot of us men, we hear that and it feels like an attack on men. Patriarchy, that's fake. That's not real.
Hmm.
I've heard about that. And what I have come to learn is that both men and women are both impacted negatively by a patriarchal society.
Hmm.
This sort of structure that we have been ruled under for generations. This invisible scaffolding of patriarchy that's been built all around us, and it creates these impossible standards for men and women.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, I think it keeps the ruling class in power, and it keeps us divided into our gender roles, and it supports religion, it supports white supremacy, it supports all of these different institutions that have functioned to keep the elite in power for
Yeah.
generations.
Yeah.
And I am learning that, gosh, how do I put this? Like you were saying that there are standards that women also have, where they girls wear pink, girls play with Barbies, girls grow up having to pay the pink tax because need tampons and they have to wear makeup, and there's all these things that are a product of a patriarchal society. Men are not supposed to be overly emotional. We don't communicate those emotions. We keep them bottled up. That's why the suicide rates are so high. Um, and also as we get older, we are expected to perform and provide, right?
Hmm.
And if we can't do those things, our perceived value
Yeah.
goes down, down, down. We need to be successful.
Yeah.
That's how we find a mate,
Yeah.
And so it's like women have been dependent on finding a man that is successful, and men have been pressured to be successful,
Yeah.
and so these two gender roles that create all this unfair pressure on both of us, and it's
Hmm.
like women had to rely on men for a really long time. They couldn't vote, they couldn't have their own checking account or a credit card or any of that stuff. They had to go through a man in order to find financial security. So it
Yeah.
was, of course, there's all this pressure to find for guys to be successful. A
Yeah.
woman's not going to want you if you're not. But I think now we're seeing women are able to make a lot of their own money and find their own success, get their own education. They're outperforming men in a lot of ways, which, hey, good for them. That's amazing. And I think that you're seeing some of the scales balancing a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
And I guess for me, like deconstructing patriarchy, I think that a lot of the things that we see wrong in our society. You look at the Epstein files, you look at our government and what's happening, the war in Iran right now. A lot of these, if not all of these problems, in my opinion, can be traced back to patriarchy. It ultimately it's male leadership.
Yeah.
It's men's egos ruling the world.
Yeah.
We want to dominate, we want to control, we want to extract resources, we
Hmm.
want more land, we want more money, we want more access to women. And it goes on all over the planet,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, it's men making these decisions.
Yeah.
It's the patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I think if women were in control, I feel like there would be a lot more of a communal trying to center children, trying to center the elderly, our wounded veterans, people that really need support in our society.
Hmm.
And I don't think women as readily want to accumulate wealth. Like Elon Musk just became a trillionaire.
Yeah.
I don't think if there are women that are greedy and are shady and doing these sorts of things right now, it's because they're a product of patriarchy.
Hmm.
They have been corrupted by the way that our patriarchal society has been set up.
Yeah.
They protect the patriarchy because they're benefiting from their proximity to
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah.
You know, as
Uh,
where oh, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. You were making a lot of good points. I'm trying to keep up with what you're saying without forgetting anything. There's a few things in there that I think you brought up are really important to hit on. I think just from talking to a lot of men over the years, and I do notice the same thing. I feel like there's a shift occurring where you see more men out in the open taking care of their kids, or and more women are working. I think in general, I think you know men generally I think are happier being at home taking care of the kids, well, and I think women are happier out making money and feeling successful. And I think part of that is also the fact that I think this goes into your point about like how the power structure in our world is set up where men are in control. But I also think men are more susceptible to be addicted to power and the ego. And I don't think women have as big of an ego as men do. And for that point, I think they don't they don't need the power like men need power, right? So like when people in power get power, they just want more power. It just like feeds their ego. And I think it's like society has kind of placed us in this role to control us. And I think the opposite, like you said, I think if it's the opposite way around, I think men would be happier, being at home taking care of the kids and just taking care of the house. I think generally, like I've stopped working too. and I feel like liberated. I feel free. I feel like I don't have to answer to anybody. I can, take care of my, my, I can take care of my family in the house. I don't have to be outside the house to take care of my family. And and I think women feel great when they feel independent and successful, and they're happier because of that. And which kind of brings me to another point I think you wanted to discuss too, is the red pill movement. And how do you think that like influences like young men today?
I think that, God, yeah, that's such a good question. It's one that scares me. It's a topic that scares me. I have young daughters. I wonder what life is going to look like 10 years from now, when they're starting to have feelings toward boys, they want to have a boyfriend, whenever that occurs. It's like, what are these young men going to act like? How are they going to feel about women? And I think that a lot of what we call the red pill movement
Can you
is,
explain what that is to people that don't know what that is?
yeah. So the red pill is actually a documentary. And as far as I understand, it was written and produced by a woman, and it talks about a lot of the ways in which men got the short end of the stick in society. Men go to war, men have the more dangerous jobs, all the unfair expectations that are placed on men, how women benefit from men's labor. And it really sort of paints the picture of men as the victim and women are to blame for it. In my opinion, I've watched it. That was what I got out of it.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of the people that are heavily influenced by this red pill movement just need to play the tape forward a little bit further, so to speak, to see how all of those things that they're complaining about being disadvantaged by were created by patriarchy. All of that structure is a product of this patriarchal framework that's all around us. Sure, you can say men are the victims, women are the instigators. It's not true. Patriarchy is the instigator. It is being under the rule of the egos of rich, powerful men for
Hmm.
generations. They want us to be their worker bees. They send us off to war. They have us, do all of their labor, and we get paid just enough to get by, which doesn't even feel like is true anymore. Um, all the things they talk about in this red pill documentary are a product of patriarchy.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of that would be taking place if we were in a world that was matriarchal.
Yeah.
Like you said it perfectly, Dennis, that a lot of it is the result of egos of men. Women don't have that intrinsic ego structure that men do,
Hmm.
where like they say women are too emotional to lead. Men are too emotional.
Yeah. We just
Look at us.
bottle it up better.
Yeah, it's dangerous. We're
Yeah.
we're at war with Iran right now because we have a president that is incapable of taking accountability.
Yeah.
He's creating a distraction somewhere else to
Hmm.
avoid consequences for something else that he's done. You
Yeah.
look at Netanyahu, who's been trying to pull us into this war for 20, 30 years now, and here we are,
Yeah.
because of the egos of men. Like,
Yeah.
why are we at war? Every time there's war, it's because a group of powerful men in a room somewhere decided that's what it would be.
Yeah.
They decided, hey, we're offended by this. Our ego is offended by this. We need to retaliate. We
Yeah.
want your land. We want access to your oil. We want more resources. Rich, powerful men decided that. And
Yeah.
then American men go off to die. And it's been happening for generations, and it just
Hmm.
keeps the wheel turning. We're
Yeah.
like these hamsters on a wheel, and we only understand so much of it.
Yeah.
It's all a product of patriarchy. It
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I agree. Don't want to get into politics too much, but I find it interesting that like, there I think there's so many people that share the same feelings that you do. And what drives me crazy is that like even people that agree with it will not verbally say it because they don't want to say that they were wrong. They don't want to say, oh, I voted for the wrong person, or the things that I believed are not being challenged. And I think that goes into the egoic mind too. It's like I think a lot of men don't want to admit that they were wrong in what they did. And I think the moment you can like admit that, I'm and that's a big picture, but like even a individual level, like on a like if you can admit, oh yeah, I acted this way in the house, like, or I shouldn't have raised my voice, or I shouldn't have done that. Once you start like able to like admit your faults, that's when you can like grow and change and evolve. And I think, we do that on the individual level, then we can do it on the collective level. And I think that's what's important about the platform that you have, and the amount of people that are starting to follow you and listen to you, is that you can, I would assume that probably most of your followers are probably men. Is that
No, most of my followers are women.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like 75%.
Oh, really?
Yep.
That's a surprise to me, because I feel like what you're saying is extremely valuable to for men to hear. So that's interesting. So well, let's talk about the social media act. A part of it, like, and how you have found your voice, and do you feel like it has made a profound effect on people, and do you get a lot of comments about that? A lot of feedback on that?
Um, yeah, yes, I am. I'm trying to gain more male followers. I think for a long time when I was talking about parenting and being a stay-at-home parent and the struggles, this and that, a lot of women followed me because they're very much into that. There's
Hmm.
a lot of women in that space that are at the forefront of parenting and they care about that kind of content. Talking about patriarchy, deconstruction, unlearning. I try to cater my messaging toward men.
Hmm.
It's important to me, And so something I wanted to touch on really quickly
Yeah.
was not wanting to get into politics. And I just wanted to say for anybody that's listening, whether you're on the left or the right, I believe that our two-party system and the way we're pitted against one another
Yeah.
is also a product of patriarchy. I
Yeah.
think that it is an engineered division
Yeah.
that keeps us fighting each other
Yeah.
instead of them. It's left versus right instead of bottom versus top. And they have engineered that to a T, to where the left blames the right for everything and right blames the left for everything.
Hmm.
And I just think that, at least for me personally, the further I go down this path, the less I buy into that. You know, at the end of the day, I feel like we all want the same things. We all want
Yeah.
to feel safe. We want to feel provided for. We want to love our family, keep our children safe. Um, and it's like the I don't know, the further you go down this path, the more you realize middle class, hardworking men and women of America are not your enemy. That they are your allies,
Hmm.
And I try not to be too critical of men in my content. I am a man, I am a man. I've had to learn all these things, and we're all at different places in that journey,
Yeah.
and we have to meet people where they are.
Hmm.
A person can only meet you as deeply as they can meet themselves.
Yeah.
And for me, for a long time, that wasn't very deep,
Hmm.
and I try to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And to answer your question, the content, my content, I feel like um, I hope it's making a difference. I don't know. I get a lot of comments and people agreeing with what I'm saying. People challenge me on stuff, which I love, and I try my best to be authentic and
Hmm.
to tell the truth and stay vulnerable.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect. I'm more than willing to admit my shortcomings, my faults, where I've messed up, what that looked like for me personally. And because I think that's what people can relate to,
Yeah. Everything you said, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you just said it a little bit better than I did. I think you're really good at communicating. I think, just to get back, the two-party system, I've said that for a long time too. I think the way we run our government kind of has an expiration date. I think that's why there's so much conflict in our country today, just because it doesn't resonate with anybody anymore, and they're seeing the faults in it, and people are starting to wake up to it. And of course, social media helps with that. It also hurts a little bit with it too, because there's so much uh, convoluted stuff out there, and a lot of people are just putting stuff out there without fact checking and things like that. So there's a problem with that, but there is also a flow of information that people have now, and they're seeing all the wrongs in the world, and they don't agree with it anymore. So more people are finding their voice, which is great, and that will kind of help move our society forward. There's just this awkward phase, I think, that we're in. I like to always explain this like the way I see like where we are as like a human species. I feel like we're kind of like in the puberty phase. We're kind of like awkward and not sure in what we're feeling. We're extremely emotional and like we're having all these emotions. And I eventually will grow out of that phase, you know, as long as we don't like, you know, kill ourselves in the process. But
That's a good analogy. I
yeah,
like that.
I've always felt that way, you know, because it's just we're so weird that way. But just to get back on like social media really quick, I wanted to touch on like you know, I'm sure you get a lot of positive feedback, but you probably get a lot of negative feedback too, I'd imagine. Just the amount of sheer followers that you have, that you know, there's got to be like negative comments in there, and you know, you know, when you talk about the ego and all the stuff that we talk about, it's got to like kind of you. I would feel like it would affect you. So how do you deal with that when you do see that?
Um, oh man, that's a good question. I will say that early on in my social media journey, I was a lot more susceptible to negative comments impacting me personally. I would get very offended. I'd be "Rah, rah, rah, rah," like typing back,
Mm-hmm.
or I would respond with a video. You see people put people's comments up here and they respond with a video. Look at what this person said and blah blah blah. I did that. And the longer I've been in it, you really learn to just not let things affect you. People say what they need to say and then they're on to the next video
Mm-hmm.
20 seconds later. And they
Yeah.
don't know who you are, they don't know you personally. And people have a right to say whatever they want to say.
Yeah.
You're a public facing figure that is voicing their opinion on the internet and you're opening yourself up to people's criticisms of you. And I respect that.
Yeah.
I signed up for that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't take it personally anymore, and I get a lot less um, negative feedback, I guess. You learn as time goes on, you learn how to speak in a way that is more inclusive.
Yeah.
I like to speak in a way where if a guy comes across my video, I'm speaking in a way that he'll actually listen to what I have to say.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to come across as like some dude that like hates men who's just trying to get women to watch his video.
Mm-hmm.
Like that his whole audience is women and he's trying to say things that appeal to women at the
Yeah.
expense of men because that goes on a lot on social media. It really
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
And it's like I can't help men if I'm just being a douchebag,
Mm-hmm.
Especially if I'm someone who's been there myself. I perpetuated patriarchal standards for years. All of that stuff lived inside of me, and it's like if I'm just deconstructing the last 5 or 6 years, I have to be willing to meet people where they are,
Mm-hmm.
and that comes out in the way that I communicate. It comes out in my videos, it comes out in my social media presence. So the more mindful I am of that, I feel like the less negative pushback I get from people. But you're always going to have negative comments. It's just
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of the beast of social media. I'm sure you see that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just see it generally in society because you get so many people have so many different opinions, and I think it comes back to people don't want to challenge their own beliefs, and they hear something that may be true, but they don't want to feel like they're wrong for what they believe in, and it's just hard. But I think what I think is really important is the fact that like we, I think men put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right? We put a lot on our shoulders, right? To try to be successful, to provide, to suck up our emotions, to be a good husband, be a good father, all these things. And a lot of times a lot of men shut down. So I think it's important that like for a man to like I know for me, my journey started like I was in a rough place too. And for me, like my awakening journey kind of started. Like I just felt really lonely and like isolated, even though like I had a loving wife and every. I just felt very lonely in my life. So I just started reading and researching. I'm trying to figure out like what is going on that I'm feeling instead of like dipping myself lower into that place. So I picked up books like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which was like profoundly influential to me. Like that kind of just woke me up into realizing things. And then once I kind of had that moment, I kind of just started almost like stepping out of myself, having like a perspective outside of myself and just seeing how I'm acting. how a lot of the things that are wrong in my life is because I'm causing them myself. Like I'm the one that's like creating conflict. I'm the one that's enabling things, and I'm the one that's doing it. So when I take a step back and take control of my own life, I started to seeing a shift all around me. So for any men that are out there listening, I think it's important to know, like, get rid of all the pressure that's out there and just focus inward and start looking at yourself and seeing what you can do for your own self personally, and then you'll see everything around you shifting. It's kind of my advice on that, but
Yeah,
just wanted to mention that.
yeah, that's great. That's great insight. Yeah, the change starts within,
Yeah,
and the way you react to your world is different. With seemingly without effort. It feels effortless
yeah,
sometimes. Like my internal world is shifting and rearranging,
yeah,
and my reaction to things looks a lot different than it used to,
yeah. Well, I think men in generally are not as emotionally intelligent because we've been told, to suck up and our emotions and things. And I think, when we start listening to, like you mentioned earlier, like start listening to our significant others and, and opening up ourselves emotionally, that's when a lot of change happens. I think when we start seeing our emotions, because if we get angry at something, we can start noticing that we're getting angry instead of reacting. Um, so I just think that's how I kind of go about my day. I realize, like, I try to pay attention to what I'm feeling, and sometimes that's hard because we're just like we push our feelings to the side. So like just sitting there paying attention to what we feel as we're feeling it is a huge challenge. And my wife's had to teach me that many times. Like, oh, if you feel something, say it. If you're angry or upset, say it. And I'm like, why is this so hard for me? Why am I having such a difficult time telling you that something is upsetting me? Like, and challenging that narrative is, and my wife is like, I don't know, just say it. Like she makes it sound so simple because she's more emotionally intelligent than I am. They feel everything. Everything they come out is their emotions and how they feel. And like, we can't hold that. We can't hold that space for them because we can't even hold that space for ourselves.
Right,
So, um,
right. Yeah, and we also put a lot of, from what I understand, we put a lot of the onus on women to like regulate our emotions
mm,
and to sort of be our therapist.
that's a good point.
We
Yeah.
get into relationships and we want a woman to fix us. Here's
Yeah.
what I'm feeling, and we start pouring all this stuff into them. Our temper tantrums and what we're upset about, and things that went on in our childhood. And I'm like, yeah, I've put a lot of unfair pressure on women throughout my life because I was never able to have that dynamic with other men.
Yeah.
I grew up playing sports. I grew up in locker rooms. I grew up going to the bars, like hanging out with a lot of guys that were loud and rowdy. And like you bring up something that is remotely emotional, something you're feeling or dealing with, you're gonna get made fun of.
Yeah.
That's sissy shit. We don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Like it just and I hope to see that dynamic change. I
Yeah.
think that if we continue talking about it and we raise the level of consciousness,
Hmm.
what the expectation is for men, and
Yeah.
and we normalize like softness as strength.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with something, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You're in a locker room and talking about something you went through over the weekend is normal.
Yeah.
Three or four other guys overhear you talking about it, and they want to come over and give their input or give you a hug if you need it.
Hmm.
Like I remember, being in 12-step recovery. That was a huge part of recovery, was men being there for other men, being comfortable talking about their emotions, and it created a space for healing. It was one of the few spaces where I regularly saw men being authentic and communicating their emotions. And
Yeah. That
I
must have
hope,
been extremely hard for you when you were going on this journey, because I know you struggled with alcoholism as you mentioned, and did that kind of shift go hand in hand with you? Did you when you kind of had that wake up moment? Is that when you kind of wanted to work on that part of yourself, or was that like a separate experience for you?
um, to work on my alcoholism.
Yeah.
No, that happened earlier on.
Okay.
Uh, I was forced to work on that
Oh, okay.
years prior. Because I would have died. It would have killed me.
Okay.
I had no choice. It was accept help or die from drinking, and
Yeah.
that it kind of runs in my family. Um, there's a lot of trauma in my family going back generations. They say that trauma is handed down through our genes.
Yeah.
Like we can be born into the world predisposed to traumatic events, and
Hmm.
our nervous system is wired a certain way from like the generations before us. I believe that wholeheartedly. But
Hmm.
um, yeah, I went into rehab at 25 and started to learn a new way of life, and I did get sober. And but it only changes so much,
Hmm.
like my larger views of the world and how things are supposed to be remained relatively the same for a decade.
Yeah.
The stuff that I'm learning and feeling now has been more so like I think having children was the catalyst for that. Getting
Hmm.
married was a catalyst for that. Being a stay-at-home dad, joining TikTok. There was a lot of things that sort of contributed to like, oh, maybe I don't have this all figured out.
Hmm.
Maybe the view that I have been given the first half of my life is not accurate. I have the wrong script.
Yeah.
There's a reason that I'm continuing to struggle with all of these things.
Hmm.
You know,
Well,
why
it's
why
also very therapeutic, I think, right?
yeah.
You have an outlet for yourself that you can vent to, so I think you've created like a healthy outlet rather than like, for people, going out and, doing drugs or alcohol and things like that. You created kind of that foundation for yourself where you have a good outlet now. Did you get therapy throughout any of this process at all?
Yeah, I did individual therapy for about 6 months, and then I also did couples therapy
Hmm.
with my wife for another 6 months, and it helps tremendously.
Yeah.
I would say finding the right therapist is probably the biggest
Yeah.
the biggest part of that. There's some good ones and some not so great ones, but we found someone that really like listened, had 15 years of experience, pointed out some we learned about our attachment styles and how our childhood, contributes to how you attach to relationships in your life, how you enter relationships, how you enter friendships. You
Yeah.
know, I have an anxious attachment style. I'm very cognizant of other people's emotions. I'm very good at reading a room. I'm very good at pattern recognition, all of these things that I'm hyper vigilant of because I had to be that way as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, my wife is an avoidant. She doesn't like, it's not easy for her to talk about her emotions. She
Hmm.
doesn't like conflict. She's can be dismissive at times. And she learned about her attachment style and
Yeah.
how that was developed, and from early childhood neglect. Her emotions weren't important. They weren't talked about. They didn't talk about feelings. I love you was not a big thing in her home. And so we have opposite attachment styles, and a lot of times, those attachment styles find each other. You
Yeah.
know, an anxious will find an avoidant, and vice
Yeah.
versa.
That's true. That is totally true, but I think it's necessary because it challenges our structure. The reason I wanted to bring up therapy is because I think there's such a taboo, especially in men, to not go out and seek therapy. They think something's wrong with it, or they're just too prideful to go. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's extremely important. I've gotten therapy as well. I did hypnotherapy, which I think was very profound for me because it's almost like, you can bottle up like years of sessions into like, one or two sessions of hypnotherapy. Like, because what I did was, the hypnotherapy that I did goes into our childhood and sees how we viewed the world as a child. There's things that our parents may have said to us that we're looking at it from a child's mind, and we're not understanding the circumstances, and then we take that in and make that our belief system, and then we grow up with those beliefs. So the hypnotherapy kind of takes you into that child's mind, and you're able to reframe and understand because you look at it from your mind now, and you see that those things are, lies and not truths. And so I'm just a big proponent for therapy, and anybody that's listening, like, for men, it's okay to go get therapy, to go seek help, to talk to people, whatever therapy is to somebody. I mean, it could be anything, but it's okay to do that. And I just wanted to make sure I bring that up because that's why I wanted to ask you if you've done it because, you have, a platform where people are listening to you and I think they hear you, I want them to know that it's okay to do that.
That's a really good point. That's a great thing to say out loud, you know? I think my experience as a man is that it's hard to accept help from other people. You know, we don't readily reach out for help. You know, it's instinctual for a guy to say, "No, I've got this figured out. Let's not overreact. I've got this figured out." I did that for years, years and years and years. My
Yeah.
my brother was the one who really pushed me to do therapy. You
Hmm.
know, you really need to do this, Owen. Like he had done it before me, and yeah, I think that there's this subconscious script running in our mind that we don't need to reach out for help. We have it figured out. It's not as bad as it seems. Therapy's not for me, it's for the other person, you know, and until there's something that happens in our life that really forces us, you know,
Hmm.
our wife leaves, you know, we get divorced, you know, our drinking goes off the rails. You know, we get our fourth DUI and we're looking at jail time. Like there's something that pushes us into actually getting help and taking that action, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like
Yeah.
you said, it's okay to just go explore that, you know, try
Yeah.
to ask for help, become a better version of yourself. And therapy is absolutely, I am someone that didn't think I needed it. I
Yeah.
thought I've done 12-step recovery. I'm good at talking about my feelings. I don't need therapy. I absolutely needed therapy.
Hmm.
You know, a paid professional that went to school for this, that understands what they're talking about, and I have absolutely no clue. Like, yes, I needed that. I needed someone to say, it's not your turn to talk.
Yeah.
It's your turn to listen. You know, here's what you're not seeing. Here are your blind spots. Here are your triggers. Here are your attachment styles. It is time to listen to your wife. You know, not that I was talking over anybody, but I feel like as men, we need to learn to listen better. I know I did. And therapy is a huge part of that, you know?
Yeah. I totally agree. What you're saying is absolutely true. I think the point you're making about like, how men get into these circumstances where basically their whole life is falling apart around them, but they still blame everybody else.
Hmm.
Like, or they're having multiple divorces or whatever. They can't stay in relationships. Like, it's always got to be the other person's fault. At some point, you have to start looking at yourself and you got to start seeing I have control over myself and I'm not going to allow these things to just happen to me. I can step in and be stronger for myself, love myself more. Because that's what it ultimately comes down to. Most people have that feeling that they're not enough, you know, but they are. Everybody is enough. You are all you need. And I think when people have that narrative running in their head, they're angry at the world and they think everybody's against them. So, and this
Yeah.
is where like therapy and just self awareness and looking at yourself really helps. Like just educate yourself and just make a shift. I mean, that's really important.
Yeah. That's well said. I
Thank
agree.
Thank you. So, just kind of moving on a little bit. Is there anything you feel like any messages, anything that you would like to share for anybody that we haven't
Uh,
already talked about?
yeah, I think, you know, my heart goes out to guys and girls, you know, to men and women. But for any men that are listening to this podcast, just I want to put out there that there's so much that goes wrong in our lives, so much that we struggle with that's not our fault. You know, you feel like this horrible, shitty person that's done bad things and you've made mistakes that has created a ton of shame in our lives. We stay stuck in these like shame spirals that keep us drinking, that keep us making bad decisions, that keep us cheating, that keep us, you know, partaking in all of these things. And we end up like, I don't know, it's why the male suicide rates are so high, you know? And I just feel like if there's a message I want to put out there, it's that like you said, you are complete and whole just the way you are, you know, and a lot, if not all of what you're experiencing and dealing with is not your fault. We have to learn a new way of life. We were raised in a system that is unfair. We come into this world, these beautiful, kind, innocent, pure little boys that are exposed to a system that is not fair. It is designed to push us into labor, suppressing our feelings, being physically strong, being dominant, like all of these things that create internal chaos, you know? And if you're feeling that, if you're feeling that way, there is there's a better path forward. There's a different way of life. There is deconstructing, there is unlearning, there is healing that you can find, and I just know men have a lot of self-hate. I know because I've been there. I hated myself so much that my drinking almost killed me multiple times because I was just running from everything I was feeling inside, all of the bullshit from my childhood, everything that was fucking unfair, and it turned me into somebody that was completely dysfunctional. And if that's relatable to anybody, you should know that you matter, that there is an answer, there is support, and just all you have to do is accept a hand, accept the help, start talking to somebody about what you're feeling inside,
Yeah.
that it's okay to do that. It's absolutely okay to do that. That's what my message would be.
Yeah. Well, very well said. I appreciate those words, and I think anybody that will hear that will appreciate it, especially if they're going through something. So that was very well said. If anybody wanted to find you on social media, where could they go? Where would be the best places to find you?
On TikTok, it's just my name, Owen Squires. I think it's Owen_Squires, Squires, but it's just my name. That's my handle on TikTok and on Instagram.
Okay. And I will say one thing I wanted to mention. I reached out to you, complete stranger, and you got right back to me as soon as you could. So, like, if there is anybody struggling, they probably, I don't want to flood all your messages or anything, but you were really good at communicating that, like, you genuinely tried to get back to people, unlike a lot of people on social media. So I just wanted to throw that out there that, you're a good person for doing that, because a lot of people wouldn't have taken the time to do that. So, that's how we end up meeting and, talking now. And so I appreciate you for having a voice for a lot of men out there that don't have a voice, and hopefully it can reach more people. Even the women out there, if they can just share it to their boyfriends or husbands, and see what you've gone through and your story, maybe it'll kind of help shift something in them. So what you're doing is, I think, very important, and I think a lot of men would appreciate it.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So thank you again for coming on and having a conversation with me. I really appreciate it. You've been great to talk to, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I would love that.
All right. Thank you. Have a good
All
one.
right, have a good day.